I want you to close your eyes for just a second.
Oh,
Imagine you are standing on a narrow, wet cobblestone street. It is twilight, but the sky above you isn't the color of a normal natural sunset.
right. It's bruised.
Exactly. It is bruised. It looks heavy and overcast and just choked with industrial exhaust. You take a slow breath in, and the air immediately catches in the back of your throat.
Oh, yeah.
It tastes like dense coal smoke, a very sharp metallic tang of ozone, and underneath all of that, just a faint, unsettling hint of burnt sage.
That is such a vivid image.
Now look up. Drifting completely silently over the soot-darkened, imposing Gothic spires of the city skyline is a massive, heavily riveted airship.
Mm-hmm.
Its hull isn't made of sleek modern materials. It is forged from heavy iron and thick canvas. And it is being held aloft not by helium or hot air, but by these massive, bulging containment sacks filled with a glowing, toxic emerald green gas. Welcome to the world of Apocalyptica Arcanum.
It is a remarkably evocative and heavy image to start with, and it perfectly sets the stage for the specific lens we are using to examine our sources today.
We have an incredibly rich stack of materials for this deep dive.
We really do.
We are looking at the comprehensive world-building Bibles, the generative style guides, actual campaign recaps, and in-universe literature.
Like that broadsheet newspaper, right?
Yes, exactly, the copper press. All of this originating from a tabletop role-playing setting known as Apocalyptica Arcanum.
Mm-hmm.
But our mission today is very specific. We are not just cataloging the geopolitical timeline or dryly reciting the history of this fictional universe. We are completely immersing ourselves in its tactile reality.
Absolutely.
We're exploring the atmosphere, the sights, the sounds, and the sheer crushing physical weight of what it actually feels like to live in the modern era of this setting, which drops you into roughly the year 2100 Anno Meteorum.
What's fascinating here is how the creators of the setting explicitly define the parameters of this world.
Yeah, let's dig into that.
The foundational phrase they use in their primary style Bible is Industrial Gothic Arcane Catastrophe.
Industrial Gothic Arcane Catastrophe.
Right. It is crucial to understand that this is not a world that suffered an apocalyptic event and simply reset to the Dark Ages.
Which is a very common trope.
Very common. In fantasy, survivors are usually suddenly running around in medieval plate armor and swinging broadswords.
Like everything goes back to zero.
Exactly. But instead, human civilization took the incomprehensible trauma of a global cataclysm and stubbornly doubled down on the Industrial Revolution.
They just pushed right through it.
They pushed forward, but they did it with violently unstable magic forcibly injected into the mix. It is a world of aggressive technological progress, but that progress is entirely driven by sheer desperation and survival instinct.
Okay, let's unpack this timeline a bit, because the stylistic baseline of this world has a very specific point of divergence in human history.
It does.
The inciting incident happens on a single day, January 18th, 1886. That is the day an event simply known as the Meteor struck the Earth.
A massively catastrophic event.
Impact so severe that it physically tilted the planet on its axis, literally shifted the oceans, wiped out entire continents, and brought raw, unfiltered magic crashing into reality.
Yeah.
But because of that highly specific 1886 date, the visual and technological foundation of this entire universe is strictly locked into the late 19th century Victorian and Edwardian eras.
The style rules laid out for this setting are incredibly rigid regarding that 1886 baseline. You will not find sleek, futuristic sci-fi designs anywhere in these source books.
No clean lines or touchscreens?
None of that. And there are absolutely no plastics. Think about the implications of that for a moment.
It's hard to even wrap your head around.
Right. We take lightweight synthetic materials for granted in our modern lives. In this world, because the timeline diverged before the invention of synthetic polymers, there is no plastic packaging, no lightweight gear, no synthetic fabrics.
Wow.
There is no digital minimalism, no chrome futurist utopias, and certainly no clean energy.
So what are they using?
The entire infrastructure of this world is built on steam locomotives, flickering gas lamps, intricate brass instruments, massive iron suspension bridges, and incredibly heavy stonemasonry.
Everything sounds so dense.
Exactly. Everything you touch in this world feels cold, dense, and heavy. It is riveted together with massive iron bolts. It is pressure-driven by steam and unstable arcane energy.
And it's all hand-built.
Painstakingly hand-built. And because of that crude industrial nature, it is inherently and constantly dangerous to operate.
I want to pull on that thread about the lack of lightweight materials, because it translates into such a visceral sensory experience when you read through the source documents.
It really does shape the everyday life.
If you look at the campaign recaps, like the very first session of the modern campaign, you get a clear picture of what this actually looks like on the ground.
Sure. Session 0.
You don't see sleek super soldiers in carbon fiber armor firing clean, silent laser beams.
Definitely not.
You see desperate conscripts marching through a sun-baked desert canyon, and they are weighed down by an immense amount of scavenged heavy gear.
Just burdened by it.
They carry thick wool bedrolls, heavy metal canteens, leather bandoliers, and they are armed with late 19th century black powder muskets and early revolvers.
Very primitive by modern military standards.
And when a gun fires in this world, it is not a sterile cinematic tupu. It is a violent, chaotic sensory event.
It's an explosion.
It produces a concussive, deafening roar. It fills the immediate area with a cloud of thick, choking, sulfurous black smoke that obscures vision and burns the lungs.
And beyond the noise and the smoke, there is a staggeringly high probability of catastrophic mechanical failure.
Right, because it's so crude.
The firearms in this setting are undeniably devastating when they work, but they demand constant meticulous maintenance, and even then they require a fair bit of luck.
Just to not blow up in your face.
Exactly. The technology is locked into cap-and-ball style ignition single-shot breech loaders or very early clunky revolvers. You will never see a magazine-fed assault rifle or a fully automatic weapon in this setting.
The precision just isn't there.
The manufacturing tolerances simply aren't there, and the materials they use are constantly degrading due to the magical radiation in the environment.
In the sources, there's a recap of their Session 0, which, for those who might not be familiar with tabletop gaming terminology, is essentially a prologue where the players get together, build their characters, establish the group dynamics, and run through a quick scenario to test out the rules of the game.
Right, just to get a feel for things.
During this test run, there's a moment that perfectly encapsulates this technological danger.
I know exactly the scene you're talking about.
A character named Zillith, who is essentially a scavenger, attempts to fire a high-capacity, custom-built 6-shot revolver that he looted off a dead Cordoban military commander.
A very valuable piece of gear.
But the weapon suffers a catastrophic squib failure. Now, I know a squib load is when a bullet doesn't have enough force and gets stuck in the barrel, but what happens next in this specific universe takes it to a completely different level.
It's not just a jammed gun.
Right. What exactly happens when technology misfires in a world saturated with raw magic?
Well, in a normal non-magical setting, a squib load is dangerous because if you fire a second round into the obstructed barrel, the gun will likely explode and injure the shooter.
Which is bad enough.
But in Apocalyptica Arcanum, the gunpowder itself is often alchemically treated and the ambient atmosphere is thick with arcane residue.
Oh boy.
So when Zillith's revolver jams, the kinetic energy and the alchemical combustion have nowhere to go.
Nowhere to vent.
Exactly. It triggers what the rules describe as a literal arcane thunderclap.
Wow.
The weapon doesn't just break, it detonates right there in his hands with the force of a small arcane bomb.
Just completely shreds it.
It sends jagged iron shrapnel flying in all directions, severely injuring both Zillith and his ally Grundle, who was standing several feet away.
That is a brutal introduction to the world.
It is a harsh, immediate lesson for the players. Every single piece of technology in this world requires the user to accept an extreme level of risk.
It's loud, it's messy, it requires constant oiling and tightening of screws.
And at any given moment, it might just violently blow up in your face.
That heavy, soot-stained, purely mechanical Victorian baseline creates such a specific mood.
It really grounds everything.
But reading through the generative style guides, it seems like that drab industrial grimness serves a very intentional visual purpose.
It acts as a canvas.
Right, it acts as this grounded, incredibly mundane, almost oppressive canvas. And the entire point of that canvas is to be violently, shockingly disrupted by the one element that completely rewrote the rules of this planet.
Shardisite.
Shardisite.
The visual discipline outlined in the creator's style guide is remarkably strict regarding color palettes.
Okay, let's unpack that.
The mundane world, the cities, the clothes, the technology, the soil itself, is painted exclusively in desaturated earth tones.
Very drab.
You are looking at a world of charcoal blacks, muted steel blues, rusted oxidized browns, and deep dried blood crimsons.
So no bright yellows or pinks.
No. It is an intentionally bleak and oppressive visual landscape. But the reason for that relentless bleakness is entirely by design. It is there to make Shardisite visually explode off the page or in the theater of the mind.
It's all about that contrast.
Shardisite is the crystalline fallout from the meteor impact, and it radiates a deeply toxic luminous emerald green.
Luminous emerald green.
Depending on its refinement, it might sometimes skew towards a cold spectral mint color.
Okay.
When you see that specific glowing green in this setting, it immediately commands your total attention because it is literally the only thing in the entire visual environment that looks truly vibrant and alive.
And it isn't just a magic rock that looks pretty on a wizard's staff.
Oh, far from it.
Shardisite is the foundational pillar of modern civilization in this era. It is the ultimate natural resource.
And a horrific environmental pollutant.
Yes, it is the primary power source for the entire globe, replacing coal and oil in the most advanced cities.
It runs everything.
I want to delve into the sensory profile of this material. The sources describe a derivative byproduct called hydrogas
Right, which is heavily harvested and refined.
to fuel the massive lift sacks of the iron airships we mentioned earlier. The texts describe it as a shimmering, slightly translucent vapor that carries a faint, sickly green tint.
But what I found most striking was the smell.
Oh yes, the smell.
It has this distinct, sharp, metallic scent, like copper coins left out in a thunderstorm.
It is quite literally the scent of progress and poison completely intertwined.
If you were to walk through the industrial district of one of the major cities in this setting, the sensory overload would be staggering.
Almost nauseating.
You aren't just looking at the green glow, you are feeling it. You have the constant rhythmic physical vibration of massive industrial shard reactors humming through the uneven cobblestones directly beneath your boots.
And the fog.
You have what the locals call Gibson fog slowly rolling in from the refinement districts.
Which isn't normal weather.
It is a thick, chemically oppressive smog that hovers low to the ground, licking at your knees. And because it is saturated with arcane runoff, the fog itself actually glows faintly in the dark wherever it pours out of exposed sewer grates or factory exhaust vents.
Picture walking down a damp, cramped alleyway in the middle of the night. The gas lamps have burned out, and the only illumination is this sickly, flickering, almost neon green light spelling out from beneath a heavy iron doorway.
That's a great visual.
Behind that door, someone is operating a secret, highly illegal, still trying to cure raw Shardisite into a usable narcotic or explosive.
Very dangerous work.
The glow is mesmerizing, it's intoxicating, but it is fundamentally deadly. There is a brilliant cynical quote from the sourcebook's introduction that perfectly sums up the macroeconomic reality and the entire atmosphere of this era.
I love this quote.
It simply says, "Gold buys comfort. Shardisite buys power."
Gold buys comfort, Shardisite buys power. It's perfect. But that relentless pursuit of power comes with horrific, deeply personal consequences, which introduces a profound layer of body horror to the setting's atmosphere.
Body horror is the right word for it.
We see this manifested in a medical condition universally known as shard blight.
Right, shard blight.
Prolonged physical exposure to raw, unrefined Shardisite or breathing in too much of the hydrogas exhaust doesn't just give you a cough or make you slowly wither away like traditional radiation poisoning.
It's much more active than that.
It fundamentally and aggressively alters your biology at a cellular level. The medical texts within the world-building Bible describe it vividly. The arcane radiation essentially calcifies the circulatory system.
The veins literally begin to crystallize from the inside out.
Yes.
I was reading through the excerpts from the In-Universe newspaper, the Copper Press,
Mm-hmm.
and there was a terrifying detailed account of an archivist named Halvor.
Oh, Halvor's expedition.
He was part of an expedition exploring the deep impact zone known as the Hinterglass Crater in the continent of Lemuria.
A very hazardous zone.
During the dig, he makes the fatal mistake of removing his heavy leather gauntlet and directly touching a massive raw Shardisite monolith with his bare hand.
Just skin-to-stone contact.
The text describes the progression of the blight, but I want to break down exactly what happens to the human body when that occurs because it is so chilling.
The account of Halvor is a textbook description of acute shard blight. The moment his bare skin makes contact with the raw monolith, the arcane energy aggressively invades his nervous system.
Immediately.
The initial symptom is neurological. His eyes roll back into his head, and he begins frantically, hysterically laughing.
He's completely overloaded.
He is experiencing an overwhelming, fractured cosmic vision, his brain unable to process the sheer volume of magical data flooding his synapses.
And then the physical breakdown starts.
Within minutes, the physical deterioration begins. Blood starts to bead from his nostrils and tear ducts.
But it doesn't look like normal blood.
No, because of the rapid crystallization process, the blood appears pitch black against the radiating green glow of the rock.
And the speed at which it consumes him is the most terrifying part. It isn't a slow disease.
Precisely. Within mere hours, the Shardisite completely hijacks his circulatory system. His veins and arteries begin to literally light up from the inside, glowing through his pale skin like the filaments of an incandescent lantern.
That image is haunting.
The blight rapidly consumes his soft tissue, converting his entire organic structure into a hollow, incredibly brittle, pale green glass-like substance.
So he just turns into glass.
And the final haunting detail of the account notes that when his respiratory system finally crystallizes and he takes his last ragged breath, he exhales a thick cloud of glittering toxic green dust. That is the true unvarnished cost of magic in this world. It is undeniably visually striking, even beautiful in a macabre sense, but it is absolutely uncompromisingly horrifying.
It's an industrial workplace hazard elevated to the level of supernatural horror.
Absolutely.
And that pervasive sense of oppressive, inescapable danger, the idea that the very air and technology around you are hostile, extends perfectly into how the people of this world design and build their living spaces.
It dictates everything.
Which brings us to the urban architecture. When you have a populace dealing with radioactive, magical hazards, mutated wildlife, and constant warfare, how does that translate into city planning?
It translates into severe urban claustrophobia.
Claustrophobia, yes.
If you are a citizen living in this world, you are absolutely not living in sprawling, horizontally planned, leisurely suburbs. Land that is safe from extreme, arcane, weather-wandering monstrosities or enemy artillery is at an absolute premium.
So they have nowhere to go but up.
Therefore, the cities here are violently vertically entangled. They are built upward and inward out of sheer desperation, driven by the crushing pressure of refugees and overpopulation.
The architectural design philosophy is so consistent across the sources.
You see the same motifs repeated?
Massive blocks of stone masonry that have been permanently stained black by decades of coal and Shardisite soot.
Intricate rusting wrought iron railings.
Towering, jagged Gothic cathedrals and massive, imposing clock towers, dictating the brutal shift schedules of the factories.
But because they cannot expand outward, they just keep building on top of themselves.
The streets at the ground level are essentially sunless, artificial canyons.
Because the architecture is so stacked, natural sunlight rarely reaches the bottom levels. You have haphazardly constructed wooden and iron walkways bolted to the sides of buildings.
Just clinging to the stone.
You have enclosed claustrophobic sky bridges connecting tenements 6 or 7 stories up in the air. You have incredibly steep, precarious, zigzagging staircases.
And in the lower districts.
In many of the older sinking cities, the lowest districts are just completely flooded with toxic runoff.
So there are no streets down there anymore.
The poorest citizens down there don't use carts. They navigate the black, oily, reflective water using small, flat-bottomed workboats, constantly ducking under low stone arches and hanging rusted pipes.
Okay, let's ground this in some specific locations, because the campaign notes give us some incredible localized flavors of this architectural misery.
Good idea.
For example, in the first modern campaign, the players have to travel to the city of Caracas.
Ah, Caracas.
In this alternate geography, Caracas is described as a fiercely independent, neutral, pirate-controlled port city on the jagged northern coast of the continent of Amazonia.
It is a rough place.
It seems to be the absolute epitome of this gritty, desperate, survivalist visual language.
Caracas represents the raw, unpolished reality of the setting. It lacks the grand Gothic pretensions of the older continents.
It's purely functional.
The streets in the lower wards aren't even cobblestone. They are unpaved, deeply rutted dirt and toxic mud. The air is permanently choked with a thick, caustic, yellow-green smog pouring out of the rudimentary Shardisite refineries that operate around the clock.
Just a miserable place to be breathing.
The city is geographically hemmed in by foul, brackish, chemically tainted water. The overarching atmosphere is one of absolute, unmitigated urban decay where everything feels damp, rusted, and temporary.
The players in that campaign recap literally have to trudge for hours through these sprawling, dangerous outer slums.
Just to get into the city proper.
It's described as a maze of shanty tents made of old airship canvas, corrugated iron lean-tos, and knee-deep stagnant filth.
And they're doing all of this just to reach the College of Arcana.
Which is the only clean building in the district. entirely hidden away behind a massive, magically sealed, rune-carved stone
The
wall.
inequality is staggering.
It really is. But I want to contrast that raw, muddy grime of Caracas with the continent of Europa.
Europa feels entirely different.
It does. The city of Dresden is heavily industrialized, but it has a much older, more haunted atmosphere.
They've built these massive thundering iron rail lines and sprawling smoke-belching factories directly over the crumbling ruins of centuries-old monarchies.
Europa is where the Gothic aspect of the industrial Gothic descriptor truly shines.
Cities like Dresden or Prague are perpetually shrouded in thick, cold fog. But unlike Caracas, which feels like a newly built shantytown, Europa is burdened by its ancient history.
History just weighs on
In
everything.
Europa, the old myths of the pre-meteor world didn't die. They simply adapted to the smog.
Adapted how?
You have literal vampires who have traded their ruined castles for the penthouses of industrial slaughterhouses.
Vampires running slaughterhouses.
And ancient clay golems that have been repurposed to haul coal in the rail yards.
That is amazing.
They casually exist in the deep shadows of these maze-like gaslit soot-stained alleyways.
I love that image of a vampire navigating a smog-choked industrial city. It's such a great fusion of genres.
It really is.
But if we really want to talk about the absolute peak of this setting's visual language, the place where the rules of scarcity seem to break entirely, we have to talk about Atlantis.
Atlantis is a massive anomaly.
When I was reading the geographical lore, Atlantis stood out so much. The rest of the world is drowning in mud rust and poverty.
Yeah.
But Atlantis is this terrifying exception.
It really is.
It rises out of the freezing northern seas like a jagged crown of flawless, crystal-polished jade and gleaming brass.
Atlantis is the one faction in this world that never had to learn what the word scarcity means.
Because of where they are located.
Due to the geographical anomalies of the meteor impact, the island of Atlantis sits directly atop the single greatest reserve of hyperpure raw Shardisite on the entire planet.
A motherlode.
They don't have to scrape and filter toxic mud for a few glowing pebbles. They literally mine it in massive crystalline veins.
So they have unlimited power.
And because they possess this unimaginable wealth of arcane energy, their cities are permitted to indulge in an aesthetic of grotesque, overwhelming decadence.
But wait, I want to challenge that premise for a second.
Sure.
If the entire rest of the globe is locked in desperate, bloody conflicts over resources, people are dying from shard blight just trying to refine a handful of hydrogas, how is Atlantis just sitting on a literal mountain of the most valuable substance in the world without being immediately invaded and conquered by the massive military machines of Cordoba or Amazonia?
It is a logical question, but it comes down to the sheer terrifying scale of their magical superiority.
They're just untouchable.
You cannot invade Atlantis with steam-powered ironclads and black powder muskets when they can vaporize a dreadnought with a concentrated shard beam from 100 miles away.
Okay, that's a strong deterrent.
Their defense is their overwhelming, almost alien technological and arcane supremacy. Their capital city is built in these massive concentric rings stepping upward out of the ocean like perfectly mathematically calculated terraces of pure carved jade and reinforced glass.
So no dirty brick or rusted iron there.
They don't have slums. They have perfectly sanitized, magically climate-controlled districts.
And the descriptions of daily life there are just unsettling.
It's very eerie.
Because they have these massive, flawless shard reactors pulsing deep beneath the pristine streets. They have enough power to maintain endless, weeks-long festivals and aristocratic masquerades.
It's a society of constant indulgence.
The citizens don't even show their faces. They wear these incredibly intricate masks made of living, magically animated porcelain that shift expressions based on their moods.
Instead of street lamps, what do they use?
They don't use flickering gas lamps. They have perfectly spherical, floating shard globes that bathe the city in a clean, steady, spectral mint light.
And the law enforcement is perhaps the most intimidating detail.
Human soldiers don't patrol the streets.
No.
Law and order are enforced by the United Guard, which are these massive, 10-foot-tall, flawlessly polished, war-forged automata.
Giant robots, basically.
They are metallic, soulless, magical constructs parading in perfect synchronicity, enforcing the absolute will of the High Monarch.
It's undeniably beautiful, but it's a terrifying, cold, and utterly alien kind of beauty compared to the rest of the world.
What synthesizes all of these incredibly diverse cityscapes, whether it's the caustic, muddy struggle of Caracas, the haunted, fog-drenched Gothic alleys of Europa, or the terrifying jade and glass sanitized excess of Atlantis, is a shared foundational philosophy.
They all have that in common.
The world feels like it aggressively built over its trauma, rather than ever taking the time to heal or erase it.
You see soaring, sacred cathedrals that have been violently repurposed and gutted to serve as alchemical laboratories.
Just tearing the pews out and putting in vats.
You see the collapsed, burned-out husks of old aristocratic mansions being used as foundational footings for massive, sprawling iron scaffolding that supports new factories.
The architecture of every city is a tangible, physical record of their stubborn, ugly survival.
And if the cramped vertical cities are monuments to human survival, the vast, untamed world outside those city walls is a sprawling monument to endless, unrelenting destruction.
That leads us perfectly into the wider geographical landscape, and specifically the defining geopolitical conflict of the setting, the American Forever War.
The American Forever War is arguably the most dominant aesthetic force shaping the global landscape outside of the urban centers.
It's just a constant meat grinder.
It is an endless, grinding, mechanized conflict primarily fought between two massive, entrenched superpowers: the rigid, imperialistic nation of Amazonia in the south and the fiercely industrialized, pragmatic Republic of Cordoba in the north.
And this war has been going on for how long?
According to the timeline, this specific conflict ignited in the year 1651 Anno Meteorum and has continued virtually uninterrupted for over 400 years.
400 years of fighting over the exact same strips of blasted land.
Generations of soldiers.
I want to spend some time on the logistics and the visual toll of a conflict that lasts that long. We aren't talking about a war of rapid maneuvers or brilliant cavalry charges.
No, the front lines barely move.
This is an atmosphere of pure, uninterrupted, agonizing attrition. The landscape descriptions in the style guide are heartbreaking.
It's total devastation.
We're talking about incredibly complex networks of defensive trenches that don't just stretch for miles, they stretch for entire time zones.
There are thickets of rusted, magically reinforced barbed wire that are so dense and old they essentially function as man-made forests.
The battlefields in the contested zones have been shelled so heavily for so many consecutive centuries that the topsoil is completely gone.
Nothing can grow there.
The ground is just heavily cratered bedrock and pulverized stone resembling the dead surface of the moon.
Aww.
And the natural waterways, the rivers and streams, literally run thick and black with toxic alchemical residue, cordite, and industrial runoff from the endless munitions factories feeding the front lines.
The skies above these devastated battlefields are just as violently scarred as the earth below.
With the airships.
They are permanently filled with the drifting massive wreckage of what the source materials refer to as airship gray fields.
Because these massive iron and canvas dirigibles are constantly engaging in slow, brutal artillery duels in the clouds.
The landscape below is littered with the shattered, rotting hulls of downed airships. You have acres of torn, flapping canvas, massive brass engines slowly rusting into the poison earth.
Just metal everywhere.
And the skeletal iron ribs, these ships jutting out of the mud like the rib cages of dead leviathans.
And think about the soldiers who have to actually live and fight in this environment. The visual contrast between the two armies is stark.
Very distinct styles.
You have the Amazonian forces who maintain this rigid, almost antique, aristocratic military discipline. They march into the mud wearing these deep, vibrant blue coats with polished brass buttons, looking like something out of the Napoleonic era.
Very formal.
And they are fighting the Cordobans, who have fully embraced the grim reality of the trenches, wearing highly pragmatic, heavy soot gray uniforms designed to blend into the ash and the mud.
But the war has gone on for so many generations, and so much extreme violence has occurred in these specific locations that the magical radiation has reacted with the trauma.
This is where it gets incredibly eerie.
The sources describe the phenomenon of ghost regiments.
Ghost regiments.
These are silent, glowing, translucent formations of fallen soldiers, still dressed in their faded, rotting uniforms that mindlessly manifest and march across the blasted wastes at dusk.
They don't attack the living, though, right?
Yeah, you don't attack. They're just residual echoes still trying to follow their final centuries-old orders. The land isn't just physically ruined, it is literally tangibly haunted by the sheer volume of the dead.
This profound environmental scarring raises an important question about how humanity interacts with the natural world in this setting, because it isn't just the Americas that have been rendered deeply hostile to human life.
If we shift our focus to the continent of Antarctica, we encounter a completely different but equally terrifying frontier atmosphere.
Antarctica is a phenomenal piece of world building.
It really flips expectations.
Because the meteor physically tilted the planet on its axis Antarctica. which obviously used to be the frozen, desolate bottom of the world, was violently shifted.
It now sits directly on the planet's equator.
This sudden extreme change in climate and the influx of raw arcane radiation transformed it from a frozen wasteland into a hyper-fertile, aggressively mutated mega-jungle.
The stylistic baseline here isn't mud and trenches. It is a desperate struggle of civilization trying to hold back an oversized, violently predatory nature.
The governing body there, the Republic of the Union of Arctica, operates as a state of permanent, paranoid military junta.
And their architecture deeply reflects that existential terror. They do not have cities deep within the continent. They live on a razor-thin coastal fringe.
Just clinging to the edge of the water.
Their settlements are huddled behind massive brutalist fortresses of poured concrete and reinforced steel.
The defining geographical feature of Arctica is the Grain March.
A continuous, heavily fortified wall of interconnected watchtowers, searchlights, and deep concrete trenches that violently separates the vital coastal farmland from the dark, encroaching tree line of the mega-jungle.
And they absolutely need those massive concrete walls because the fauna in that jungle is beyond comprehension.
The ambient magic caused gigantism in the wildlife.
If you are a farmer on the Grain March, you aren't just worried about a wolf eating your sheep. The jungle is teeming with colossal armored herbivores the size of Spanish galleons that could casually trample a farmhouse into dust without noticing.
And the predators are even worse. The text mentions glass-maimed lions, massive mutated felines whose fur has crystallized into razor-sharp shards, and their frozen coats literally chime like wind chimes when they exhale.
It is an atmosphere of exhausting, constant vigilance. You're out there trying to harvest your transgenic wheat, but you have a heavy-loaded elephant rifle slung across your shoulder.
Your eyes are constantly scanning the tree line.
And you are never more than a 20-yard sprint away from a reinforced concrete pillbox.
It is a verdant, overwhelmingly green and terrifying landscape. But if we want to explore the extreme opposite of that hyper-fertile growth, we must examine the desolate, howling, arcane wastes of the continent of Arabia.
Yes, Arabia's entire design philosophy is absolutely incredible. The vast interior of Arabia is effectively a massive, churning graveyard.
It is a region where the ancient pre-meteor civilizations have been completely swallowed by endless oceans of sand and battered by monstrous magical phenomena known as shard storms.
To survive in this environment, human engineering had to adapt drastically. The major surviving population centers like the great city of Mombasa are entirely sealed beneath these unimaginably massive, translucent, glowing emerald shard domes.
These domes are considered the absolute pinnacle of defensive arcanotech engineering. They project a constant, impenetrable, hard-light, magical energy shield over the entirety of the sprawling metropolis.
Inside these domes, the atmosphere is utterly disconnected from the reality of the desert.
It is opulent, deeply theatrical, and dripping with decadent wealth. It functions as a heavily guarded haven for reclusive billionaires, black market relic hunters, and high-end mercenary companies looking to spend their gold in incredibly lavish climate-controlled casinos and grand bazaars.
But the contrast is what makes it so compelling. What is happening just outside that thin, glowing green bubble?
It is an absolute chaotic hellscape. The shard storms can last for unbroken weeks.
And these aren't just strong winds blowing sand. The storms are thick with raw, magical radiation, and they carry ancient predatory monsters born of localized myth and belief like towering jinn and massive burning ifrit.
These entities constantly mindlessly batter against the exterior of the energy shield.
So you have this surreal juxtaposition. You could be sitting in an incredibly plush velvet-lined theater box, drinking a remarkably rare, fine vintage wine, bathed in this soft, soothing green light.
While literally just a few miles away, a mythological screaming terror of sand and fire is violently trying to claw its way through the dome to butcher everyone inside.
It is the ultimate expression of fragile, constructed luxury, completely surrounded by primordial elemental danger.
Which brings us perfectly to the core metaphysical rule governing this entire universe, and arguably the single most important element dictating its unique visual style.
If we take a step back and connect this immense physical brutality of sprawling wars and the intense psychological toll of these hostile environments to the bigger picture, we find the fundamental, unalterable law of Apocalyptica Arcanum.
Belief manifests reality.
Belief manifests reality. Let's really dig into this because this is a specific concept where the magic system of this world completely separates itself from standard generic fantasy tropes.
Magic here is not a clean, clinical, predictable energy system.
You don't just memorize a few Latin-sounding words, wave a polished wooden wand, and get a neat, sparkly light.
Magic in this world is inherently messy because it is entirely born of intense, raw human emotion.
It is fueled by devotion, absolute terror-crushing despair, and manic obsession.
And because the fuel source is human emotion, the physical result of the magic looks like human emotion.
The visual implications of this mechanic are endlessly fascinating from a world-building perspective. When a character in this setting successfully casts a spell, the visual aesthetic of that manifestation is deeply, sometimes uncomfortably personal.
It is never generic. The magic physically takes on the psychological weight, the traumas, and the specific quirks of the caster's mind.
To make this relatable, think about the placebo effect in our own real world, where your brain genuinely believing that you're being cured can actually trigger physical healing responses in your body.
In the universe of Apocalyptica Arcanum, that psychological principle is weaponized, irradiated by Shardisite, and turned up to 1,000.
If you are a child who is genuinely, deeply terrified of the dark caster, the shadows in your bedroom don't just look scary, they literally become sharper, colder, and physically dangerous.
The campaign notes have some fantastic, highly specific examples of how this works for the players.
There is a gnome artificer character named Mikkel Cobbleob in the first modern campaign.
Yes, Mikkel.
When Mikkel casts a standard magic missile spell, it doesn't manifest as a flurry of glowing blue darts of generic force energy. Because Mikkel has a very quirky, slightly unhinged, highly chaotic mindset. His specific spell manifests as a flock of shimmering, loudly quacking, chromatic, angry ducks.
And these arcane ducks physically fly across the battlefield and violently batter the enemy into a canyon wall.
I love this detail because normally in fantasy, magic is portrayed as incredibly majestic and solemn. But here you have a character tapping into the raw, destructive power of the cosmos. And because his brain is a bit weird, he violently summons angry waterfowl.
It brings a necessary moment of levity to the grimness, but in universe it's actually an incredibly dangerous lethal attack.
It perfectly illustrates the rule.
And conversely, to show the darker side of that same coin, we can look at another character from the recaps, the war-weary cleric, Vladimir Vladislav.
When Vladimir casts the spell Spiritual Weapon, it does not appear as a glowing righteous sword or a holy golden hammer, which is the standard trope for a cleric.
Instead, because he is burdened by immense loss and grief, the weapon manifests in the grim, heavy, petrified shape of his dead loyal hunting dog.
It appears rock-stiff, an incredibly sad, heavy echo of loyalty dragged back from the afterlife, and he physically uses this petrified form to bludgeon his enemies.
It is a profoundly sad, emotionally exhausting, and deeply visceral visual representation for a combat spell.
And it's exactly this raw emotional pressure, this collective centuries-long trauma of billions of humans constantly amplified and refracted by the radiation of the Shardisite in the Earth, that literally birthed the actual gods of this world.
This collective psychic weight birthed two distinct opposing pantheons. The choir, which are colloquially known as the angels, and the legion, which are understood to be the demons.
And the visual language and architecture surrounding these two opposing pantheons is rigorously, meticulously defined in the style guides.
Let's examine the choir first. The choir is an entity born collectively from humanity's desperate belief in virtue, the profound need for hope, courage, strict order, and enduring love.
Therefore, the visual space is dedicated to them, and the entities themselves are universally represented by grand, unyielding institutional authority.
When you walk into a cathedral or a sanctum dedicated to the choir, you are immediately hit with an overwhelming, almost crushing sense of grandeur.
The architecture features flawlessly polished white stone, impossibly long echoing aisles, and this very distinct, warm, honey gold light that pours majestically through massive, intricate stained glass windows.
Visually, it is the one major glaring exception to the bleak, desaturated, soot-stained color palette of the rest of the world.
It provides a striking, immediate contrast. But despite how beautiful and pristine it looks, it doesn't feel welcoming. It feels incredibly heavy.
It feels completely weighted down by centuries of strict dogmatic power and uncompromising hierarchical authority.
Precisely. It is undeniably beautiful, but is fundamentally an architecture designed for control and subjugation to a higher, inflexible ideal.
Now contrast that soaring golden authority with the spaces dedicated to the worship of the Legion.
The Legion was not born of hope. They were born directly from humanity's collective trauma.
They are born of suffering deep-seated fear addiction and destructive selfish obsession. Therefore, their spaces are never grand or public.
They are intensely intimate, deeply transgressive, and aggressively hidden from the light.
You are absolutely never going to find a demon cult operating out of a grand sweeping plaza in the center of the city.
You find them in cramped, forgotten underground chambers beneath the flooded districts. The design philosophy of these spaces relies on claustrophobia.
You see altars cluttered with hundreds of melting misshapen wax candles, secret shrines built from old polished bones, and overwhelming sense of damp organic corruption, and what the Creator Style Guide very specifically refers to as blood-dark residues staining the stonework.
It is an atmosphere that feels inherently secretive, damp, and deeply violating.
And the physical manifestations of the entities of the Legion themselves are deeply unsettling because they are tailored to prey on very specific, deeply ingrained human frailties and desires.
They do not appear as abstract monsters. They appear as the answers to desperate prayers.
A perfect example of this is the entity simply known as the Devil.
This is arguably one of my favorite character designs and manifestations in the entire lore setting.
It is brilliant.
When someone hears the phrase, the devil, the cultural instinct is to picture a massive, muscular, red-skinned monster with giant horns, goat hooves, and a flaming pitchfork.
But in Apocalyptica Arcanum, the Devil is the direct physical manifestation of pure, selfish, ambitious desperation.
So what does a manifestation of ambition actually look like?
He appears as a completely unremarkable, average-sized man dressed in an immaculate, perfectly tailored, incredibly sharp white suit that somehow never gets dirty despite the mud and the smog of the cities.
He has slick-back, black, greased hair and wears a simple red tie.
The only truly supernatural tell is his eyes. They are green, but the pupils look exactly like fresh, burning, crackling embers.
He doesn't scream, he doesn't roar, and he doesn't threaten you with hellfire.
He quietly hangs out in the smoky, crowded backstage corridors of the theater districts, or sits alone in quiet, dimly lit crossroad taverns in the rain.
And he simply offers very soft, highly logical, utterly ruinous bargains to desperate people who just want a quick shortcut to fame, wealth, or power.
He is the exact physical embodiment of a very bad, life-destroying decision.
He smiles warmly at you, but the smile never actually reaches his eyes.
He is the ultimate quiet embodiment of the core philosophy that in this brutal world, if you want something badly enough, the universe will absolutely bend and give it to you, but then it will systematically and completely destroy you with the very thing you asked for.
To summarize this massive, intricate tapestry, the entire world of Apocalyptica Arcanum, from its rusted, misfiring cap-and-ball revolvers and soaring, soot-stained Gothic cathedrals to the toxic green smog choking its desperate vertical cities, the endless muddy trenches of the Forever War, and the literal angels and demons walking its streets, is one giant, literal physical manifestation of humanity's collective trauma, their unyielding, destructive ambition, and their incredibly stubborn, ugly refusal to simply lie down and die.
It is a world that quite literally wears all of its deepest, ugliest scars on the outside for everyone to see.
So as we wrap up, I want you to really think about that. What would it actually be like for you to walk down that wet, dangerous cobblestone street we talked about at the beginning?
The entire appeal of exploring the specific visual language is that it forces you to exist right on the razor's edge between total apocalyptic ruin and a terrifying industrialized renaissance.
Every single piece of technology you use, every flight you take on an iron airship, every bullet you load into a rusted cylinder requires you to accept an extreme life-threatening risk.
And every deep belief you hold in your heart has a tangible, immediate, physical, and often highly dangerous consequence on the world around you.
We have managed to cover a tremendous amount of ground today.
We really did.
We've seen how the foundation of this world is rigidly anchored by its heavy, tactile, mechanical Victorian roots.
We examined how that mundane baseline is violently and beautifully disrupted by the toxic, luminous, emerald green intrusion of Shardisite.
We've thoroughly explored the extreme vertical claustrophobia of survivalist cities built under immense demographic pressure.
The endless, grinding, mechanized attrition of the 400-year American Forever War.
And finally, how the intense, raw, emotional reality of the inhabitants literally shapes the magic system and gives physical form to the divine and demonic entities of the world.
So what does this all mean for us sitting here in our safe, modern reality?
Imagine for a moment if our own world actually worked this way.
What if the architectural layout of your own city, the weather patterns right outside your bedroom window, and the depth of the shadows in the alleys behind your house were literally physically shaped and altered by the collective mood and the hidden traumas of your specific neighborhood.
If your absolute deepest, darkest fears or your most desperate soaring hopes didn't just stay quietly locked away inside your head, but actively crystallized into the physical environment around you, violently warping the street lamps and changing the color of the morning fog.
What exactly would your street look like tomorrow morning when you walked out the front door?
It is a genuinely sobering thought, and it is exactly the kind of philosophical reflection that makes the world of Apocalyptica Arcanum so endlessly compelling to explore and unpack.
It really is an incredible piece of world building.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. We will catch you on the next one.